Good evening. Tonight I'm going to be doing Missionary, the new album by Snoop Dogg, fully produced by Dr. Dre, as a return after Snoop's debut work with Doggy Style, where we now have Missionary. So the next album by Snoop to be completely produced by Dr. Dre, and so it's certainly great to hear the two of them together. They certainly have great chemistry together. So having a full album from the pair of them again is it kind of listed as a collaborative album. I wouldn't necessarily call it that. You obviously with Dre being the producer of the album, as he was with Doggy Style. It's just a Snoop album produced by Dr. Dre, who brings in a lot of his close friends to help with the production side of things. Most of the tracks are listed as Dr. Dre and the ICU, which, by the looks of the credits, appears to consist of Focus, Fredwreck, Dem Joints, Eric Griggs, and a couple of other people. I think it was like 5 or 6 people. These are the ones that seem to consistently come up under the tracks listed as Dr. Dre and the ICU. And certainly all of the producers in that list do appear on other songs as well. So it's basically Dr. Dre in collaboration with all these people. So in terms of the music itself, it's quite a nice range of tracks. So certainly Dre has been, and his group of producers have been trying to diversify the type of songs that they're making on here. In comparison to Doggy Style, which was obviously very G Funk influenced, this album takes, I say, just more of a varied approach to production, slightly more fuller production. There certainly seems to be, whilst there's very telltale Dr. Dre signs of the very heavy drums and piano keys and that kind of thing, there's a lot of kind of like worldly influences and different styles of music from around the states as well. The album certainly quite liberally uses lots of samples from other songs, such as Out of the Blue, which in Dre's verse samples the Lisa Stanfield All Around the World. The chorus is a interpolation of MIA Paper Planes. Hard Knocks, I believe the song is, has another Brick in the Wall sample in the chorus. So yeah, again, quite a varied set of samples and interpolations, some of which are so heavily involved in the song itself that they have become featured credits. Another Part of Me, featuring Sting, who doesn't appear vocally from what I can tell, but the music is very heavily taken from Police Message in a Bottle. Sting has since been listed as a featured artist for it. Last Dance for Mary Jane, featuring Tom Petty, with samples the Mary Jane's Last Dance song by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Interestingly, which came via the Defiant Ones series that Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine did a few years ago. Tom Petty was on an episode and said that he'd really like to see Dr. Dre do a recreation of that song. Obviously, Tom Petty has since passed away, but his family gave Dre the files to use. So, having learned that, that's quite an interesting and quite a very nice thing to do as well. Um, it's also possibly my favorite song on the album. It's certainly got a very strong beat to it, with a very like kind of country rock feel to it. They're taking the Tom Petty sample. Um, Jelly Roll features on the second verse, and Jelly Roll is on several songs at the moment. It's a very hot feature at this time. I think this is the best I've heard him sounding, not knowing his own stuff particularly well. Like vocally, he sounds like really pained at points. This weird vocal kind of like sounds. It kind of goes a little bit into sort of CeeLo. It kind of sounds a little bit from time to time, and there's certainly the first time I've certainly heard that from him. Um, but yeah, Dr. Dre brings out the best in people when he puts them together. I mean, Snoop is never going to be confused for Rakim or anything, but on this album, he certainly comes a lot harder in terms of the his pace and his lyrics and punchlines. Like he certainly has more multi-syllable rhymes and more clever punchlines on here. Probably with the help of the ghostwriters. There's quite a few of them listed. Well, certainly a couple who are listed throughout the album, who appear to be helping Snoop and Dre with their writing. Um, was only for Snoop as someone who quite often just relies on his like very trademark laid back flow and catchphrases. Just to hear him not fall into that so much on the album is really refreshing to hear, even though what he's saying isn't necessarily anything new, and it's good. Like the content is generally about him and to an extent Dre's history and placement in hip hop, as a kind of like an elder states people kind of saying, which a lot of the older generation of artists are doing at the moment. So again, nothing necessarily new, but Snoop does sound really great throughout. And considering how heavily Snoop will quite often rely on features in his projects as well, the majority of the rapping is Snoop. There's been a few other guest vocalists dotted throughout the album, but Dre isn't featured that heavily on the album. He only makes two appearances in terms of verses, I believe, and I think maybe some other like vocal appearances. Um, but in terms of rapping, it's Snoop, Method Man who appears on the track Skyscrapers, and the collaborative track Guns and Smoke featuring 50 Cent and Eminem. So, and that kind of a milestone appearance of having three of Dr. Dre's most well known and successful proteges all on a track together. And maybe not necessarily being the best work of any of them, but they all do sound good together. 50 is one of the better verses he's done in a while. And, Snoop goes really high over the Biggie Smalls sample. So there's some Biggie Smalls references in his lyrics. M, you know, goes, you know, doesn't go too doesn't fall too hard into some of his recent trappings as well. Even though they do appear a little bit, they don't take over the verse too much as they have done in recent. And again, it's just great to have all of them appear on a Dr. Dre song together. Yeah, so I'd also be remiss to not mention the short film Missionary, which has been released in conjunction with the album on YouTube. which is basically just a short of Snoop and Dre about for about 12 13 minutes. Um, in the music business, shooting the video for the song "Out of the Blue," when it's reveals that someone has gone into their freezer, and then it transpires with some narration from Method Man that Snoop and Dre are actually hitmen who have spent the entirety of their career just offing people who for various reasons, which, considering some of the things that come out in the music industry, is not out of the realms of plausibility. But it's all done in a very comedic tone. Dre and Snoop are telepathic as well. They can hear what other people around them are saying and themselves. And it turns out that the bodies the bodies that are in the freezer have been put in there by someone else who from a phoned in performance at the end of the film we find out who. um, but yeah, Dre and Snoop are just, again, have great chemistry, are really funny together. There's a great moment in it where, Snoop just keeps referring to Dre as Dr. Dre, and Dre's like, where it's just the two of you, you don't have to keep calling me Dr. Dre. And Snoop's like, well, you're the one that named yourself, don't get mad at me. It's just, it's not, again, it's not the most amazing film or anything, but it's just really good fun to see the two of them together, just clearly enjoying what they're doing. Um, and yeah, it's only as a full project, 16 tracks, which is a bit shorter for a Snoop album. Quite often, Snoop's albums will go over 20 tracks or about that kind of a number, and so I'm glad that Dre has kind of reined him in a bit in that regards. The track list is 16. Apparently, Dre wanted to make it 14, but Snoop argued for 16, which I'm happy with. There's even like throughout all the songs, there's nothing that really feels out of place. Like even the weaker songs on the album do kind of fit on there, and it would be a shame not to hear from them. I am interested to if there ever comes like which were the two songs that Dre didn't want on the it wasn't any specific songs. He just wanted to make the album more concise or something. Track number 7, "Thank You," which samples Sly and Family Stone, um, wasn't initially on the track listing when it got released as a 15 track listing, so that clearly must have been one of the songs that initially wasn't going to make the album, and Snoop made a last minute argument for it or something, which again it's a fun song, so I'm glad it did make it on there. And yeah, again, it just would be a bit of a shame to see any of these tracks fall to the wayside, particularly when Dre and Snoop don't come together too often. You don't get many albums completely produced by Dr. Dre, so it's it's good to keep as much of it as possible. Um, in terms of the impact on Snoop's discography, I mean, Snoop has a very long discography. It makes it a bit difficult to actually go over the entirety of. But I would certainly say that this is one of the stronger projects that is done. I would happily put it up there with Doggy Style. It certainly works as a nice companion album, a sister album to it. I mean, I would even probably say that it is actually better. Just it's in terms of it, having as great as Doggy Style is as an album, from the production and Snoop feeling so young and fresh as he was at the time. It can be a bit one note, whereas this album is more over the place, but in a good way, in terms of like just drawing from more influences, more inspiration. So a more well-rounded album overall, and it may not have any of the big singles that Snoop has been associated with in the past from his work with Dre, with Pharrell Williams, with any of the other big name producers that he's used in the past. But this, certainly from top to bottom, all the songs on here are really well produced. Just sounds so crisp and clear, and it's certainly the best work that either Snoop or Dre have done in quite a while. And while it may not be, this may be the only time that they do anything like this at this point in their careers. It's just great to hear them producing, making music like this again, and hopefully, certainly Dre can find more reason to do projects like this with other artists, or bring more production like this with other artists. Yeah, I have to say that I really enjoyed Missionary.